Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the 20th through the 35th verses in the third chapter in the book of Mark. Here is part of the scurrilous campaign of slander and smear that the religious authorities whom he was upsetting and antagonizing attributed his power of exorcism to the power of Satan. And we read of similar accounts in Matthew 12 and Luke 11. I've done one on both. And Matthew's account really, a lot of the details and the dialogue and the contents overlap of what we read, such as the dialogue itself, and then the blasphemy against the Ruach Hadesh is explained. We don't read of that in Luke's account. But the focus is more on the division, and the consequences of being on the wrong side of that division towards the tail end. And in Luke's account, we read at the end of which is more detailed and descriptive of demon possession. And but we read in the tail end, someone says, "Oh, blessed is the mother who birthed you and sucked you." And he said, "No, blessed are you if you follow my words and obey them." But Mark expands more fully on the family dynamic. And in fact, in this chapter, he redefines the nature of family, the family of faith, that is, distinct from the family of blood. But in the third chapter, we witness him healing a paralytic man in the synagogue on the Sabbath, which was forbidden activity by contemporaneous rabbinical injunction, and this upset the Pharisees and Herodians so much that they conspired to kill him in the 6th verse. But then from there, the ministry of the Messiah marches inexorably forward, gaining new converts and new audiences and performing signs and wonders. And in the 11th verse we read, "And the unclean spirits, whenever they saw him, fell down before him and cried out, saying, 'You are the Son of Elohim.'" So he had a power over every demon-possessed person. There was no demon he could not conquer or expel. And in the 15th and in the 13th through the 19th verse, we read of his selection of the 12. These were known as the disciples, distinct from ordinary disciples in the Gospels, but are henceforth known as the apostles, beginning in the books of Acts. And he gives them, in the 15th verse, we read, the same power that he has to perform exorcism, he gives to them. And then he names we read of the names of the 12, and in the 19th verse, we read of Judas Iscariot, who is the final one, and the actual reading begins in the verse 19b. "And then they went into a house, and again the crowd came together, so that they were unable even to eat bread." So busy and so frantic was the man in the midst of his ministry that he didn't even have time or space or room to eat bread to perform this vital bodily function. He was immersed in his ministry, so much so that his spirit so ruled his body that he couldn't even eat if he wanted to. And when his relatives heard about this, they went out to seize him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." Now this forms the radical redefinition of family that we read beginning in the 31st verse. So the evidence indicates that the brothers, the biological half-brothers of Yahshua, struggled to believe in him during their own lifetimes, but they became convinced and converted after the resurrection. James and Jude both wrote epistles, which are included in the New Testament. But during his own time, his biological half-brothers, these would have been his younger brothers. Mary was a virgin when he conceived him, so he would have been the eldest brother, and after that, she would have conceived through natural as opposed to the supernatural impregnation by the Ruach Hadesh, of which we read of in Luke 1:35. Here we read these brothers came through the marriage and consummation of her and Joseph. but they now, whether it was from a sincere desire to get him out of what they saw as a hazardous situation, or they were just opposed to him and didn't want him to do what he did, we gather there was something negative when they said he is out of his mind. So they were concerned for him and misunderstood him. And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebul, and he cast out demons by the rulers of the demons." In Matthew's account, we read that it was the Pharisees. In Luke's account, we read it was a crowd. But here it's specified to a scribe who was sent down from Jerusalem. He would have been in Galilee, which was technically to the north of Jerusalem. But in any case, he was sent from there. And he attributes his power of exorcism to Beelzebul, which was another name for Satan and is etymologically derived in the Philistine deity Baal, and I think it translates literally the suffix and the prefix when combined as Lord of the Temple or Lord of the House. So he's accusing him of being submitted to Satan, by whose power he cast out the inferior demons. And calling them near, he said to them in parables, "How is Satan able to cast out Satan? Satan has no interest or advantage he's jealously possessive of his territory, so he would not allow these demons to voluntarily or let someone else, even one of his minions and his human or demonic minions, to expel these demons that are in complete control of these people who possess them. And when one is demon possessed, they lose all semblance of self-control and sanity. We read of many exorcisms both before and after this chapter in the book of Mark and throughout the Gospels. And if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom is unable to stand. So a kingdom or a union or organization must remain united lest it fall. Unity is paramount. Else if there's civil war or factionalism in it, it's not going to last. It's not going to stand. The forces of evil, of which Satan is the author and leader of, are as united, and Satan would not, he is jealous over his possessions, the ones whom his demon possesses. So they had bad theology and fallacious logic in their accusation, which was smear and slander and scurrilous. And if a house is divided against itself, that house is unable to stand. So he translates the physical analogy of a house, which would have been constructed of physical materials. If it's divided against itself, if it's constructed improperly, it's not going to stand, it's going to fall. And so that is likened to the kingdom of Satan, who is in every way a mimicker and imitator. Just as Elohim has a kingdom, so too does Satan have the kingdom. In fact, he's identified as the ruler of the world in places such as John 12:31 and maybe 1 Corinthians 4:4. I'm not entirely sure on that, but moving on. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he is unable to stand, but has an end. Satan knows that his time is short and his destiny is doomed, but while he's still here, he's going to try and take as many people, everyone if possible, down to the pits of hell, because as the old adage goes, misery enjoys company, but he cannot do that if he is working against himself or his subordinates. He has no interest or advantage in expelling or attacking any of his demonic or human minions, but the idea that he is divided and at cross purposes with himself is utterly fallacious and false. No one is able to enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, and then he shall plunder his house. So by analogy, the house would have been the body of the demon possessed, and the strong man who guarded it would have been the satanic demons whom this person had invited into his life. No one becomes demon possessed. The adversary will show up uninvited to the born again believer, but all the evidence indicates that one has to invite Satan into their lives before they become demon possessed. And but he's frankly proclaiming his superior strength and power to the demons and even Satan, at whose behest they were in him. So he's claiming that he was able to cast out Satan's own, not by his own power, but by his power, which is greater than Satan. Truly I say to you, all the sins shall be forgiven of the sons of man, and whatever blasphemies they speak. Blasphemy is the third commandment of the Decalogue. It is speaking the Yahweh's name, or Elohim more broadly, in any of its manifestations. We read of blasphemy of the Son in the Ruach Hadesh. Eventually, it is to bring that name into disrepute, malign its character, use it vulgarly, profanely, or trivially. Often people say casual things that I'm not going to repeat here that are really blasphemous, and it's there is conscious blasphemy and inadvertent blasphemy, but we are not without excuse for allowing those slips of the tongue to come off our lips, because as we read in Matthew's versions of the same story, every idle word that a man speaks will be used against him at the judgment. It's all going to be taken into account, the things we said in our most secret, guarded moments when no one else was listening. The Yahweh is always listening. He knows our thoughts and the intents of our hearts perfectly and fully, better than we know ourselves. But he who blasphemes against the Ruach Hadesh has no forgiveness forever, but is subject to everlasting judgment. So what is so special about the Ruach Hadesh? Now, blasphemy was part of the course of his ministry. He was being blasphemed right there by, even though he was of divine origin, they said he was satanic. That is blasphemy, and that would, but they still had a window to repent during his lifetime. The Ruach Hadesh would fully manifest after his ascension, after his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. He is his designated replacement. And from the book of Acts all the way to Revelation, he replaces Yahshua as the divine protagonist who replaced Yahweh as the divine protagonist in the Gospels. Yahweh was the divine protagonist of the Old Testament. But once he comes, and the same religious authorities who were antagonistic and violent against him would be similarly inclined to the apostles. They would arrest them, they would even kill them. And in Stephen's famous speech in the temple, Acts 7:51, he asked, "Why must ye always resist the Ruach Hadesh?" And according to the Talmud, the Ruach Hadesh departed from the land of Israel after the writings of Malachi. But he had been there the entire time. They had just resisted him, and without knowing it. So once they blaspheme the works of the apostles and attribute their powers, which are wrought and made through the Ruach Hadesh, to Satan or anyone else, there's going to be no forgiveness. They will have exhausted all available options of divine entities to blaspheme. There will be no one left, and for that there will be no chance of forgiveness. Their fate is sealed into everlasting judgment. That means hell. Because they said, "He has an unclean spirit." And his brothers and his mother came, and standing outside, they sent to him, calling him. Now, earlier in the 21st verse, we read of his relatives. Here, even though I treated them as the brother and immediate family of the Messiah, here it is specified more narrowly to his immediate family, his brother and his mother. His father is not mentioned after during his mortal ministry, so the inference is that he had died at this point. And they stood outside of the crowd, and they sent someone in to get him, call him. And a crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, "See, your mother and your brothers are outside seeking you." So they relayed the message that they were given by them to get him to come out of the commotion in the crowd and the madness and the insanity, all this controversy he was inadvertently brewing as a matter of course throughout the ministry, which he was performing and committed to. They wanted to get him away. They wanted to keep him safe. These are natural desires for one who loves someone else. So there wasn't anything maliciously motivated. Earlier we read that they were trying to seize him, which can imply by force, but here they are summoning him more gently through verbal communication. But he answered them, saying, "Who is my mother or my brothers?" So he hears the mention of his mother and his brothers, and he asks a question as to who their identity are. This seems like an odd question if interpreted literally or at face value. Everyone knows his mother is Mary and his brothers are James, Jude, Simon, and one other. But he's asking this question because he's going to give an unexpected answer. And looking about on those sitting around him, he said, "See my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of Elohim is my brother and my sister and my mother." So the true test, the church is likened to a family of faith. That's why we call ourselves brothers and sisters. We have that bond of blood. The blood we share is not our biological blood, but the atoning blood of the Savior, which was shed on the cross for our behalves. And there is a family of faith, and ideally there should be no dichotomy between the family of blood and the family of faith. That's why Paul advises believers, once committed, to marry Gentiles in the 7th chapter of 1 Corinthians, and also in 1 Timothy 5:8, I think he compares one who doesn't provide for his offspring as worse than an infidel. But there is also going to be a division. This good news message, this message is going to divide families. He came not to bring peace, but a sword. Brother is going to be pitted against father, both during his own age and at the end times. But we always have the family of faith, even if we are forsaken and abandoned and outcast and exiled from our own family, because the fact is that the world is offended by Christianity and Christians, and it does damage. It ultimately does more healing to family relationships, but it does some damage. This damage is incidental and necessary in order for the kingdom to spread in the order in which it is prescribed. And that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.